exactly. So I think that's what's hopefully going to get her through all the dreck, and a lot of kids through kind of like figuring out who they are. But I think they so need those feminists who don't even know they're feminist yet. Like, I don't know if you ask Callie and Tashawn if they are feminists. I think they completely are. And I don't know if that's the language they would use to describe who they are.
Right. Well, black women historically a lot of times have rejected the F word and chosen some other terms. So
well, who was it? You know, who said if there was a war between a white feminist and a black something, I would be shot in the back by someone who called me sister. It was, I forget, maybe it was Barbara Jordan, but basically that fight is like whose side am I really on?
Right.
Maybe it was because the person was a black lesbian.
Right.
And so that kind of dilemma, and I, you know, it is true. The minute I think of feminist, I think white woman. You know, and I think of strong black woman is the equivalent of feminist, but different. You know, it's I use different language for it. So
different associations.
Yeah,
it's really interesting.
Yeah. So
I never think of white women when I think of feminists.
Really?
So I get nervous when people say, "Could you teach gender studies?" Because I'm like, I don't know any of those white women. All I know are the black women.
Wow.
So I could teach black women's studies or black feminist studies, but I'd be at a loss. Yeah, the rest of it. Okay.
Well, but didn't the black feminists, didn't so many of them, did they ally with the white feminists?
Well, some people argue that the feminist movement, right, comes out of the abolitionist movement. So you had these really devoted white women, black women, men who were committed to abolition and that form of social justice. But a lot of abolitionists weren't interested in equality, right, racial equality. So then when you see the first wave feminist movement evolving out of the abolition movement and the push towards suffrage, you see certain very fair-skinned black feminists like Anna Julia Cooper or Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. They all have 10 names, but you know, they get invited to speak in the North but not in the South. Wow. And then you have some of the darker skinned women, Nanny Burroughs and the others that have 4 names, and they don't get included. And then, so I just feel like there's always been these kind of divergent histories, and there are moments where they're bound together, but it just doesn't seem genuine to me. Yeah, like the Black Women's Club movement, that emerges because the White Women's Club movement excluded black women.
What's the club movement? The sororities?
The Black Women's Club movement, so the National Council of Negro Women.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Uplift. All that good stuff. Okay.
I love it.
So we're almost at the end. The Cooperative Children's Book Center keeps annual statistics on the race of authors of children's books, and these stats consistently show that people of color make up less than 5% of all books published for children. I sent you a long quote by Barbara Smith, who was one of the founders of Kitchen Table Women of Color Press.
I can't believe you're explaining who Barbara Smith was.
And I'll read just a short part of the quote. As feminist and lesbian of color writers, we knew we had no options for getting published except at the mercy or whim of others in either commercial or alternative publishing, since both are white dominated. Now you are a prolific, celebrated, award-winning author. Would you say that the problems Smith identified in the 1980s have been resolved? For example, could you name, say, 5 other black LGBT authors of children's literature?
I couldn't. I probably can name 2, but that doesn't. I don't know if they don't exist. I don't know if people are not out. I think that's one of the interesting things that's still happening. And you know, even with white children's book writers, I think there are people who are still very closeted, and since people of color publishing is kind of new, mainstream getting published in the mainstream is still pretty new. I don't know how many people are kind of coming out and having their first book be a queer book and saying I'm queer. I think it's still very loaded. You know, I think you're dealing with children and you're dealing with a society that automatically associates pedophilia or whatever with anybody who's interested in children in any way, and you know, and a lot of people who still think that queerness is some pathology.
Right.
So I definitely know there are not a lot of there, I haven't come across a lot of young black writers that are new. But I feel like if the book is finished and it's halfway decent, I feel like there's a home for it. And I don't know if this is just me kind of being out there and not knowing enough about publishing. I mean, you know, you're one of the new writers coming up. I think of Co Booth, Brenda Woods, the woman who did Fly Girl. I'm just thinking of African American, Caribbean American writers that I can think of off the top of my head. I think the writing is very different. I think, you know, you're one of the people who's going to potentially change the world of, I don't want to say science fiction and sound like an old school person, but
speculative fiction.
Speculative fiction.
Yeah.
I think, you know, Co is doing more of the kind of urban stuff,
Urban
which
fiction.
is, and then people are trying to do some of the old school, you know, traditional writing. But I think in terms of publishers trying to figure out where it belongs, that's kind of a slower movement, especially with the business of books changing so quickly. And I also don't know what's happening like on the web, like what people are doing for themselves, the way Barbara was able to create a press that was still publishing paper, you know, and I don't know what's happening out in the world that people are doing, are saying, okay, the heck with publishing because they're not publishing me, but is starting your own press.
So I had to self-publish.
Yeah, so but you self-publish, but you also have your blog, which is a new part of publishing.
Right.
And you know, and you're writing. You're an academic, you know, just like she was. And so you're writing about it and changing the world that way.
Yeah.
So I think.
You feel optimistic then about the future of publishing?
You're like, shut up. I think
no, it sounds like
I feel optimistic, but I think people can't expect it to be the old way of doing stuff. I mean, I started doing this in the you know, my first book was published in 1990, I think 1989, and that was before the web. I mean, it was before so much changed about publishing.
Yeah.
I think if I was starting to write today, I would be self-publishing. I would
Do you really?
I totally think so.
Why?
Because I think that especially if I started with a book like Last Summer with Mason, you know, maybe if I started with Mason at Blue Hill, you know, because that's something other. A black girl goes to a white environment.
Right. Okay.
So I think a book like Last Summer with Mason at Blue Hill might have made it into the mainstream. Or the book I just wrote, but I think I don't know about Miracles Boys. I definitely don't think Last Summer with Mason. From the Notebooks of Melanin Sun, I don't know. I think you know, because publishers' first question is, how is this going to sell?
Right.
And how much money can I make off of it? And if they think it's going to sell to 1,000 people, that's not a good. Or if they think it's not going to have a long life, and you know, or if they think it's not going to win an award. So all of these things inform what gets out in the world, and it's sad, but we, you know, we do what we've always done, which is make a way out of no way, and I think people must be doing that because there's so many writers in the world. And
so do you think it's less likely for a writer that's starting out today, say me, it's less likely for me to have 30 books published in my lifetime with traditional presses?
With traditional presses?
It's more likely to be a mix, maybe, of self-publishing, digital publishing.
It depends on how you write. I mean, if you're writing 3 books a year, when I started out, I was writing 3 books a year, then I was writing 2, now I write about 2. And I think and I think depending, if you look at it over how many years have I been doing it? So, I think it's possible. I don't think there'll be books. They might be e-books. You know, they might be some books that you published. They might be books that go straight to film. I mean, I think there are all these things these doors that have opened that are great, you know, and so negotiating contracts is different now. So what happens when iPad wants to buy your book, which I still